In the rhythm of suburban life, time moved slowly, gently, like the leaves that swayed in the afternoon breeze or the sound of sprinklers echoing across neatly trimmed lawns. The neighborhood was quiet, orderly, unchanged. But beneath the surface of calm, every house held its own silence. Some were peaceful. Others were full of aching things left unsaid. Ryan had grown up in this neighborhood. At 17, he lived somewhere between childhood and manhood. Not quite lost, not quite sure. He was the kind of boy who noticed things. The way the sun hit the curtains at 6 p.m., the loneliness in his mother's smile, the subtle tension in a glance exchanged across a dinner table. He was thoughtful, more quiet than most boys his age, drawn to what was unspoken. Perhaps that's why he noticed her before anyone else did. Elena lived 3 houses down. Elegant, reserved, composed. A woman who always seemed slightly out of place in the ordinary quiet of their street. She was 40, married, childless. Her movements were deliberate, graceful, like someone who once lived a louder life. She had eyes that lingered too long on things no one else paid attention to. She wore sadness well, like an expensive perfume that you couldn't quite name but remembered long after she'd passed by. Her husband, Mark, was rarely seen. Often away for work, or perhaps just away. Emotionally distant even when physically present. Their marriage wasn't cold in the obvious sense. There were no loud fights or slammed doors. But there was something hollow about it. Something that made the house seem too large, too quiet, even when all the lights were on. Elena walked her dog alone. She gardened alone. She drank her morning coffee on the porch alone, always looking out but never quite at anything. Ryan first noticed her at one of those obligatory neighborhood gatherings. A barbecue, forgettable in every way except for her presence. She wore a simple white dress and sandals, her hair pinned loosely, laughter escaping her lips in small, polite doses. But it wasn't her beauty that drew him in, though she was beautiful. It was something else. Sadness, maybe. A vacancy she didn't try to hide. Something about the way she observed people, like she was watching a life she no longer lived. Ryan, in that moment, didn't know what he felt. Only that he couldn't look away. Over time, their paths began to cross more often. The grocery store. In the park. On early evening walks. At first, the interactions were coincidental, brief, forgettable. A nod, a smile, a wave from across the street. But something lingered beneath the surface. Not flirtation. Not yet. Just an awareness. A hum between frequencies no one else seemed to hear. He found himself looking for her without meaning to. Eyes drifting toward her house on slow walks, ears perking at the sound of her laugh through open windows. Her presence, though infrequent, began to take up space in his mind. He didn't understand it. He didn't try to. It wasn't love. It wasn't lust. It was fascination. The dangerous kind. Elena, too, began to notice the boy. Not in a predatory way, not at first. But in the way a lonely person notices another soul paying attention. It was innocent at first. The kind of mutual acknowledgement that floats between strangers who see something familiar in each other. She saw how he watched the world. How he didn't fill silence with meaningless noise. There was a kindness in his eyes, an honesty she hadn't felt in years. She would offer him a smile when he passed. Sometimes a compliment. Nice haircut. Good to see you out walking. Your mom must be proud of you. Little things. Harmless, maybe. Or maybe the beginning of something neither of them would name yet. At home, Ryan's mother began to notice his absences. The quiet preoccupations. The subtle changes. He smiled to himself more. Checked his phone with an unusual sense of anticipation. He seemed caught between guilt and thrill. Emotions that come when a line is about to be crossed but hasn't yet. But what line? There had been no touch. No secret meetings. Just passing moments and charged silences. Still something had shifted. The ground between them, once neutral, now crackled with possibility. One afternoon, Elena asked Ryan if he could help carry a box from her car. Something about a broken wrist, a sore back. The excuse hardly mattered. He said yes, of course. That was the first time he stepped inside her house. He noticed how it smelled of cinnamon and old books. How the walls were lined with framed photographs of vacations, none recent. How the air felt heavy, like it remembered better days. She thanked him, offering a glass of lemonade. He sat on the edge of the kitchen stool, unsure whether to stay or go. She talked about her garden. He nodded. Neither of them mentioned the quiet between their words. When he left, she watched him walk down the driveway. He didn't look back. But he felt her gaze on him the whole way. The next day, she waved from her porch again. This time her smile lingered. This time so did his. And so it began. Not with a kiss, not with a confession, but with a glance that lasted too long, and a silence that said more than words ever could. Some boundaries are not crossed in a single step. They're approached slowly, tiptoed around, circled with caution until the silence between two people becomes louder than their intentions. What begins as harmless attention, as a glance too long or a smile too frequent, begins to change its shape. The atmosphere thickens. The rules bend, quietly, invisibly, until they are no longer rules at all, just memories of where the line used to be. The visit started small. Few minutes. Favor. Borrowed book. A shared coffee under the soft flicker of kitchen lights. Each moment stitched into the next without disruption, like water quietly finding cracks in the stone. Ryan found himself at Elena's doorstep more often. At first he told himself it was nothing, that he was being neighborly, polite. But the way his pulse quickened at the sight of her told a different story. There was something about the way she looked at him now. No longer casual, no longer vague. There was intent there. Unspoken, but unmistakable. It wasn't overt. Elena never said anything that could not be denied later. Her words remained innocent, but her eyes carried weight. She spoke of her garden, her dreams, her childhood, but what lingered in the room wasn't what she said. It was how closely she listened to his voice. How her fingers brushed his hand when passing a glass. How she would pause a second longer than necessary before pulling away. And Ryan changed. Subtly at first, then undeniably. He began to dress differently when he knew he might see her. He paid closer attention to his cologne, his posture, the tone of his voice. He found himself rehearsing conversations in his head, things to say that would make her smile, things that would make her linger. In his world of teenage chaos and restless boredom, she became his center, the one person who saw him not as a boy, but as something more, something closer to a man. Elena, for her part, was not unaware of the gravity of what she was inviting in. She told herself she was lonely, not cruel, that Ryan needed someone to talk to, that there was nothing wrong with attention, with kindness. But kindness became connection. Connection became dependence. And dependence became desire. They started to meet behind the veil of routine. Quick check-in when he passed by. A shared lunch when her husband was away. A text late at night asking about his day, followed by a photo of her new book or the meal she had made. Never provocative but always intimate. These small gestures built something sacred between them. A secret world with its own language, its own time zone. A place where no one else existed. At night, Ryan lay awake, playing over every word she'd said. Every look. Every breathless moment where it felt like something might happen, but didn't. Not yet. The anticipation gripped him tighter than anything he'd ever known. It wasn't just about attraction. It was about being wanted. About being needed by someone the world considered unreachable. Elena, too, lay awake. Her marriage had long ago settled into the comfort of routine and the emptiness of assumed affection. Mark was rarely home, and when he was, his attention remained elsewhere. Deadlines, clients, business dinners. His words were functional, his love conditional. Ryan's presence, though uninvited at first, began to feel necessary. She smiled more when he was around, laughed more, remembered what it felt like to be seen. The age difference, once a sharp border, began to fade beneath the emotional canopy they built together. Still, guilt lurked in the corners. Not loud yet, but present. Ryan started lying. Nothing major, just enough to shift the narrative. A study group that didn't exist. A walk that took too long. A phone that stayed face down more often. His mother noticed the changes but said little. Only watched. Watched how distracted he'd become. How he rushed out at odd hours. How he smiled at his screen with the kind of warmth that didn't come from friends his age. And Elena. She began to fear her own need. The hunger she tried to hide was starting to surface in subtle ways. Text sent too late. A hand that lingered on his shoulder. A laugh that dipped into longing. She knew she should pull back. That nothing good could come from crossing that invisible line. But knowing didn't stop her. Because every time Ryan showed up at her door, looking at her like she was the sun and he hadn't seen daylight in years, something inside her unraveled. Then came the first undeniable moment, the moment that could no longer be explained away. Touch too intentional. A silence that asked for more. The air between them heavy, crackling, breathless. They didn't speak about it. They didn't need to. The rules had changed. The line had been crossed. Not with a kiss. Not yet. But in the way their eyes locked across the room and didn't break. In the way her hand brushed his chest and didn't retreat. In the way his breath caught in his throat and didn't release. From that moment forward, everything was different. The visits became more frequent. The touches more intentional. The world outside that house faded. Inside, time bent. They were no longer a woman and a boy. They were something else. Something forbidden. Something fragile. They hadn't fallen yet. But they were leaning, far past the point of balance, toward something they both knew would change them forever. The most dangerous part of crossing a line is believing you can go back. That after you've unraveled what was once tightly held together, trust, innocence, restraint, you can somehow stitch it back the way it was. But there's a point, always, where the return is no longer possible. A moment where silence is broken, masks fall, and consequences arrive. Slowly at first. Then all at once. What began as glances and hesitations had become a secret they now carried like a weight. What once felt electric, breathless, forbidden in the most exhilarating way now pressed on their chests with an entirely different kind of heaviness. The kind that follows choices made in moments of weakness. The kind that changes how you see yourself when no one else is watching. The secrecy no longer felt safe. Felt exposed. Phone left in the wrong room. A glance caught in a reflection. Paused too long when a name was mentioned. The world around them hadn't changed, but their ability to blend into it had. They moved through familiar spaces with unfamiliar caution. Every step felt like walking across glass. Ryan had changed, and everyone could see it now. He was quieter than before. Not in a peaceful way, but in a burdened one. His mind drifted during conversation. His emotions ran on two tracks. The boy he was supposed to be, and the boy who had become part of someone else's secret life. He began to pull away from friends, from family, even from himself. His eyes no longer held wonder. They held weight. His mother noticed first. Not the act itself, but the aftermath. The withdrawal, the way he avoided certain questions, the sudden defensiveness in his tone. She watched the slow collapse with the kind of helplessness only a parent can understand. She didn't need to know who or how. She just knew something was broken. And she feared what it might cost him. Elena, too, began to unravel, though hers was a quieter erosion. What once felt like escape now felt like entrapment. What began as a thrill became a need. And that need grew into fear. Fear of being caught. Fear of what it meant. Fear of what she'd become. She began to wake up with a gnawing ache in her chest, a question that looped endlessly in her mind. What have I done? Her husband, Mark, was still distant, still unaware, or perhaps simply pretending not to see. But distance doesn't prevent intuition. He began to sense something, a shift in tone, a look that lingered too long after a text notification. The subtle inconsistencies. The disinterest in touch. The weight behind her eyes. There was no confrontation. Not yet. Just silence growing louder between them. and the unspoken knowledge that something was off. Mark, in his own cold way, began to probe. A few pointed questions, a checking of schedules, a passing mention of the neighbor boy. Elena deflected, but poorly. The trust that had already eroded now began to collapse. There was no proof. But the suspicion was enough to change everything. The collapse came not with shouting, but with stillness. A discovery too small to ignore. Maybe a photo, a message, a look caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. One truth too many to hide behind coincidence. And with it, the slow, irreversible shattering. Elena's world changed. Not in a dramatic public way, but in quiet ways that left lasting echoes. Her husband stopped asking questions, which was worse than yelling. Friends stopped visiting. Eyes in the neighborhood lingered longer than usual. Whispers found their way into silence. Ryan faced his own reckoning. Not in the form of punishment, but of realization. What he had called love, what he thought was maturity, now felt hollow. The validation he once drew from her attention had turned into shame. The excitement had morphed into anxiety. His thoughts no longer raced with longing but with regret. The kind that doesn't fade quickly. Home, things were never quite the same. His mother said little. She didn't need to. Disappointment carries a weight that words often dilute. The silence between them became its own punishment. Not loud, but constant. Time didn't stop, but it changed tempo. Every day after felt like a quiet apology to the person he used to be. He still passed by her house but never looked. She, too, watched from behind curtains, waiting for a moment that would never come. Whatever existed between them was over. Not by confrontation but by collapse. What remained were the ruins. Of trust, of innocence, of illusion. The kind of damage that doesn't leave bruises but scars. Both would carry it. In different ways. For different reasons. But carry it nonetheless. There is no neat ending in stories like these. No final kiss. No grand goodbye. Just a slow withdrawal into normalcy, where the past becomes a shadow that visits without warning. Sometimes at night. Sometimes in the mirror. Sometimes in a passing glance at a stranger who looks just enough like a memory. What they shared was real for a moment. But it wasn't love. Not really. It was need dressed as passion. Emptiness mistaken for connection. Two people lost in their own ways, finding each other in the wrong season, at the wrong time, in the wrong roles. And in the end, the most painful truth wasn't the discovery. It was the realization that what they had destroyed could never be rebuilt. That the cost of their closeness was too high for either of them to bear. But life moves on. Slowly. Unevenly. Sometimes with guilt. Sometimes with silence. Always with change. And in that quiet space where something once was, something forbidden, something consuming, now exists only a lesson. Void. Scar.